So how do you draw water? In this series of tutorials I'm going to go through the various different ways that you can actually illustrate water, starting with the really basic, and then as we go through the tutorials I'll get to some much more complex and sophisticated ways of showing that. For this tutorial I'm going to start with this form, which is the droplet, but I'm also going to show you how this type of droplet appears on different kinds of surfaces and also from different angles. You'll see lots of tutorials that show you this basic form for water droplets, but I'm going to take it a step further than other tutorials that I've noticed on YouTube. And hopefully if you stick through to the end of the video you'll come out of it feeling that you really understand and know how to draw better water droplets than you ever did before. Now, like I say, this is the basic form and you will see it everywhere. I'm going to take it further than this, but you need to start right at the beginning. This is the first water tutorial in the series, so let's do a thorough job and start right from the beginning. So I'm just going to delete that layer, and the brushes that I'm going to be using is just a soft airbrush. I prefer it, I can do things gradually, I don't get a grain or a texture, so I much prefer it. And I'm just going to start with a black to begin with, and then I'm going to keep it quite neutral. I've got a grey background, so you see the dark tones and the white tones showing up, and then we'll try out some different sort of backgrounds a bit later. But to begin with, really, you're going to start with a basic blob shape, like a circle like that. I'm only doing it, it's quite wide still, that, in terms of the brush. I might narrow it up to do some more refining later, but I'm just getting the shape first. I might do a variety of shapes too, give them a bit of a wobble, so they're not just simply a round shape. Okay, so that'll do. I'll begin on one of the smaller ones. Now, when you're thinking about water droplets, you need to consider your light source. It is probably the most important thing you need to think about, because without a definite sense of where the light's coming from, the rest of it just won't come together and won't make any sense. So in this case, I'm going to imagine the light source is coming from from the left, maybe the upper left area. And so I need to show the effects of the light hitting from this side. The most important part of that effect is going to be where the light simply reflects off that form. So if I start with this smaller one, I'm going to show you the light source. And just to create a little bit of a blob, and then I can extend it into that area generally. So it's got a sharper point there in the centre, like that. Now, as well as the white there, we need to add some darker tones too, because the water itself kind of casts a shadow in this area. I'll get onto this a little bit more in detail later on, but essentially the water droplet acts like a lens, and it does things with the light. So what you'll find is that in this area it ends up being darker than the background. I might have done this too intense to begin with, but I can always subdue the black colours later on. I'm just getting the effect clear first, and then once you understand that I can subdue it slightly, so at least you'll understand the point. So it's shadowed in this bit with a strong light source in the centre of that shadow, and then you'll get a shadow out the back of it. So I would suggest that you don't make the shadow quite as strong as this edge of the water droplet. Now, light passes through it as a liquid, and it also has a kind of lens effect, so it strengthens the light here in the centre. That really gives the sense that light's coming through that, it's in this area and illuminating here. So it has an exaggeration of the light, so it's not like the light is just hitting the rest of it, it actually intensifies the light. So this area ends up lighter than the background, but you'll also get some light in this part of the water droplet as well. Now that's essentially the effect, and I'm just going to tidy it up slightly because I've created quite a fuzzy edge to it when I began. Like so. I'm going to do the rest of them, so you'll see how the effect of all of them together works, and I'll also explain what you do when you get something that isn't quite as much of a regular shape, but I'll do the other round ones to begin with. Okay, so that's the really basic shapes done. I'm going to show you how to advance this onto slightly less regular forms like this. they're not entirely round, they have sort of bits that eat out of them. So I'm just going to show you what you do with a situation like this. So just like you would have with here, it would sort of lead with a darker edge and then it would fade in. Now you've got to be careful not to extend this shading too far, you can get carried away. So I'm just going to start with the outer edge first. Again, with the shadow, it's a much bigger form, but because it's water, it would sit quite flat. It wouldn't build to a tower, so it's not going to cast a much bigger shadow. The height of it is relatively similar to the smaller one, so the length of the shadow is going to be very similar. So you get a much bigger surface area, but the height of all water droplets. In fact, sometimes the bigger they are, the flatter they become, because it sort of collapses under its own weight. Now when it comes to the light, this is probably the main thing that's going to differ slightly from the other ones. The other ones, because they were round, it really focused the light area into a sharper sort of point. Now on this one you will get some of that effect, but it will generally be a little bit more elongated. So you may get a sort of sharpening here and maybe a slight more sort of extended shape here, but generally it's more diffused, it's more spread out. So again, it's kind of sticking out as a point there, so it's almost like a round edge like that, so you'll get a sharper point here, and it also, all this side is facing kind of the light, even though I'm making it more from the side probably, but maybe like that just a little bit. I'm also going to add some light into this area, only into the centre area. The actual shadow does have like a sort of dark edge to it. Again, so this edge, this area should be darker, and then this area should be just a degree or two lighter than the background. Now I'm just going to spend a little bit of time just sharpening up the outlines. Now you understand the basics, I'm going to show you the effect that the water has on the background that it's placed on. Now in order to really illustrate this point, I've put a grid here as a separate layer, and I'm going to show you the effect that the water would have on the grid that it's placed on. It depends largely on the height of the water. Now it sounds a strange thing, but sometimes water sits on a surface and it really doesn't soak into it, and it remains completely separate from it. So if you've ever noticed sort of the drops of water on a feather or on a duck's back, then it sits very much on top and it doesn't settle. Whereas if you put it on a plane of glass, then it will settle much more flat. So I'm showing you something that's something kind of in the middle of those two extremes. So I'm going to show you the effect that the water has potentially on a background. And the main thing it does, it acts like a lens, so it tends to enlarge and distort whatever it's sat on. So I'm going to show you exactly in what way it would do that. Now the simplest way of me doing that is to simply obliterate the background that's within the actual water droplet. So I've just got a blur tool, and I'm just going to completely blur out, using the smudge tool, all the pattern on the inside. So I'm doing it on the actual layer that the grid is on, and I'm just blurring that. Okay, so it still doesn't look right now because it doesn't look translucent, it looks more opaque. So we want it to make it look really translucent, just like clear water. I'm going to stay on the actual layer that has the grid on, and I'm now going to switch to the black because I'm going to redraw those grid lines back in. But I need to do it really on a small brush size, and I need to be doing this rather carefully. So once I've zoomed in, you'll see the bubble doesn't look particularly neat now, but it's fine. It's meant to be viewed like this. So I'm going to zoom back out once I've amended some of the lines, and then you'll get the effect. The first thing I need to explain is it's going to make the line bigger. Now what you'll find is obviously the line that connects here and here, but as it gets closer to the edge, you'll find it sort of curves it along with the shape of the droplet like that. Now this one, because it's just on the other side of the centre, you'll curve it slightly that way. And then this one will be much more exaggerated like that. And then this one that you won't really see will be more like that. Obviously it's a grid, so we'll have to do the other way. I'll just join it up there as well. Now this one's right on the edge, so it's going to go like this. This one's not in the centre, so it's not going to be straight, it's going to be curved like that. Again, this one, if it was in the centre, it would be here, and that would be a straight line, but it's just off to the side of the centre, so we'll curve it just a little bit. And then this one's going to be curved quite a lot, because it's really off near the edge. And when I zoom back out, you can see the sort of distortion effect that it's had upon the grid. Now, there are some slight imperfections here. If I really wanted to be really picky about it, I can go back over it and just fine tune. But essentially that communicates the point. Now it would also have a slight thickening in the centre, but we don't need to get too exaggerated on that point. Just a slight hint at the centre lines would be slightly thicker. But like I said, I've already chosen a slightly thicker brush size anyway, so it already has kind of done that. That's one of them. I'll just do the rest and you'll kind of get the idea even more. So I'll run through this one. Once again, it's got more lines on it this time, so you should really get the impact of it. So this one's almost in the centre, so it's not going to affect it as much. Just slightly curve it that way. This one's definitely off to this side more, so we'll curve it more that way. And then as it goes further out, it sort of distorts it more and more. You don't want to do it to a ridiculous extent, because it's a subtlety of distortion. It's not a huge distortion. So again, we're looking for the centre line. It's not going to be as exaggerated for here because it's right in the centre, but then you go off centre. There you go. I think that illustrates the idea. I think aside from that one, because obviously I'm getting a bit of a wobbly line, but if it was a slightly less regimented shape, you would be a benefit from understanding the effect it would have on straight lines when they're placed at different points around the actual water droplet. So that's why the grid's useful. So if you understand what the effect it would have on a grid, then you can understand the effect it would have on a different background. So on that note, I'm going to actually remove the grid and I'm going to place it on a photograph that I took earlier. Now this has got a grain, so it's going to be slightly different than a grid, but essentially it's the same kind of principle. So what I'm going to do for this on this layer is I am going to use the smudge tool this time because I don't want to completely erase the kind of colour tones. I just want to obliterate the texture that's there. So I've deliberately used a photograph that has some sense of lines and texture that will understand where it would normally lie, the general direction, but I'm going to show you the sort of impact of the distortion upon it. You know, when you get to the sort of the higher levels within painting, then you have to be prepared to take on the smaller challenges as well, even though, you know, it may be time consuming, but they may really make the difference between a successful painting and not a successful painting. So obviously I was using this on a grey background before, so some of those highlights look a little exaggerated for now, and I will deal with that later. I'm just going to concentrate on the distortion of the texture at this point. And I'm going to start applying the same principles as before. So we've got a line that might kind of extend there, so I'm going to distort it slightly. I've got a line that maybe cuts across there, so I'm going to curve it, and I'm going to amplify the size of it as well. Now because we're not on a plain grey background this time, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another layer and work on top, because it's preventing me adding this colour in otherwise. So I need to just make sure I'm on that layer. And now I can start adding, as long as I put it above there, I can start adding the darker tones. So a bit thicker in the centre. Now I don't want to add the texture over the top of the highlight, so I just need to be careful of that, because the highlight would take precedence over what you would see through it for that side, but not for this side. Again, so when it gets near the edge, it curves, starts to bend with the shape of the actual droplet, but as it gets to the centre, it will straighten up. So this bigger shape should be slightly easier with this more organic texture than it was with the grid. So I am going to do a proper job of it for this one, so don't worry so much about the sort of wobbly nature of the lines. Okay, I'm just going to go into some of the centre shapes and just exaggerate them slightly now, because I really want to just get across the effect of the magnification, but you don't want to overdo it. It still wants to look naturalistic rather than sort of exaggerated and cartoony. Ideally, if you do something like this, and you want the picture to look realistic, you don't want to draw attention to these things. It wants to sort of have its effect without you even noticing it. So I'm just tidying up some of these edges too. So what I'm going to do now, I've taken back some of the highlights from this back area, and I'm going to replace it with something that is more fitting with the actual image here. So I'm going to take something from the actual image, I'm going to use that to increase the light in some of the areas here. So I want it to look like it's better lit, but I want it to fit with the actual picture itself. So I'm going to turn the opacity down, just do it gradually. So what I thought I would do is also turn the opacity slightly down. I'm going to show you the extreme end and the extreme end there. I'm going to knock it back just slightly, because there is always a tendency to overdo things, so knock it back just a little bit. It tends to look a little bit more naturalistic. So now I also see that the light source seems to be around here. I can go back onto the layer. I can perhaps extend the light source a bit more around. There you go. So that's the general effect anyway. So just to recap, the lines of the grains or whatever it is underneath it tends to get distorted and hugs the line of the outside shape the closer it gets to it. So if it's right through the centre, it remains relatively the same, although it will be slightly inflated in the centre, but as it gets close to the edge, it tends to bend it slightly too. Now, the third part of this tutorial, I want to show you a similar kind of effect, but from a much lower angle. So it's not straight down from the top, it's going to be from this kind of perspective, this kind of angle. So some of the same rules are going to apply, but there are definitely some differences. So we're going to say that primarily the light source is going to be coming from that side. So I'm just going to choose a new layer. I'm going to put it above. I'm going to choose a dark colour. Check my line, that'll do. I want to do it gradually just to get a feel for it first. So we'll do some of the similar things that you've already seen, and then I'll explain some of the differences. One of the main differences to begin with is that you'll get the round shape at the top, but because you're lower down and you're looking at it from this angle, you probably end up with a flatter base to it like this. So you get more of a dome on the top, and then it will probably flatten out more at the bottom. Now some of the same principles will apply, so you'll get some of the darker tone at the top. In fact, I'm going to choose some of my colour palette from the actual picture itself. So you're going to get some of the darker tone up here, it's going to fade out. You're also going to get the shadow, so the light's coming from here, so the shadow needs to be more, and it seems relatively low down, so you might get a slightly extended shadow. But then the light source, because you're not looking at it from the top, and because the light source is more on a level from where your eye is, it's going to be hitting the top of that shape. Or again, we can make it more intense where the sort of the center of that curve, and then as I was showing you before, this area, the sort of back area, is going to be more illuminated because it takes the light from here and it exaggerates it in this area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take something from over here, say, let's have a look at it. In fact, that's not the kind of colours I want to represent, so maybe take it from over here and eke it up slightly. So it's going to be lighter, maybe a bit more yellowy. Before I do anything else, I want to show you, like I did last time, that the grain underneath is going to change. So I need to obliterate the grain underneath it. Like that. Then I want to darken up so it matches more the kind of actual grain that's there. Just double check that. Yeah, that's not too bad, maybe a bit darker. Now what's going to happen is the grain, when it goes into the droplet, is going to again start to follow the curve. So in this case, because that's relatively central, it's going to go up through the center. But what tends to happen because of the lens effect is that it will magnify it. So it starts relatively normal here, but the further back it goes, it's taking some of the texture that presumably will be back here and really kind of magnifying it. So again, we'll take this one, but this time, again, just like in the other ones, we're going to curve it round, and we're going to thicken it up also. So there'll be one coming in here. Again, we're going to take it up and thicken it. So there might be some more texture. I'm going to exaggerate some of the textures slightly, so. Come in here, I'm going to add a line here, even though it's not there, just to illustrate the idea, and then it will thicken up sort of around there. Again, this line comes in, I'm going to quickly take it off to the side, thicken it up at the back end, like so. I'm just going to go back onto the top layer because I realised I've carried on the actual photograph layer, but it's not a problem. What will also happen, like I was saying, this side is going to become much lighter, so it's going to become a bit richer in colour and also a bit lighter, so I want to just exaggerate that point slightly more. Maybe take some of the colour that's coming from the light here as well and mix it in. Now I need to focus on the actual shadow too. I'll do a couple of smaller ones and getting maybe into the distance so it really exaggerates that sense of perspective. But that is essentially how I would create the effect of a water droplet in a kind of perspective with something that you can see underneath it like that. I'll just do another couple and then we'll leave it there. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. If it was a full painting, I would refine it a bit further, but for the sake of the tutorial, I think that you can see the point I was trying to demonstrate. I'm going to do a lot more water tutorials like this, so please subscribe, comment on my videos, and check back when I produce more. I also do lots of other videos on other themes like fire, landscape, skies, and I plan to do a whole series of each of those different categories, as well as my own personal artwork as well. Thanks very much for your support, and I shall see you back here again.